and welcome to Series 2 of my podcast Innervation, where we get to hear the wisdom and experiences of incredible women in science and technology. My aim with the conversations that you'll hear on this show is to learn more about STEM, science, technology, engineering and maths, and to hear from STEM people who are from diverse backgrounds who tend to be really underrepresented. Essentially, through Esteemed, I want to get smarter and more knowledgeable about the world of STEM, but also bring a voice to the voiceless who are actually doing STEM themselves. I was one of those people. I grew up in a very STEMmy household where we were raised to be curious about the world around us and figure out how things worked. Maybe that's the reason why I studied mechanical engineering. It taught me so much about how things work, but it was actually life itself that taught me that not everything can be explained with neat little mathematical equations. Life is messy. It doesn't always unfold in a straight line. And here on Innervation, I want to hear how other people in STEM have dealt with that. This week, I talked to Yue Li, a neuroscientist.
My name is Yue Li. I'm a neuroscientist. I was born in China and received education there. And now I'm working as a postdoc at the University of Geneva. My studying focus on addiction-related neurocircuits and synaptic plasticity.
Wow, cool. So what exactly is your research about?
Well, I'm studying addiction-related neurocircuits and synaptic plasticity. There are billions of neurons in the human brain, and they communicate with each other through chemical and electrical connections called synapse. And those neurons wire together, and we call them neurocircuits. And a specific neurocircuits encode a specific like emotion or behavior, like reward or aversion or even simply movement. And so the activity of neurons encode the information reception inside the brain, and external stimulation could alter the strength of synapse or the structure of synapse, which is considered as an engram of memory. Of course, the changes of synaptic plasticity also changes the related behaviors. So our study focused on addiction-related synaptic plasticity because addictive drugs will elevate extracellular dopamine level, and this can modulate the strength of synapses, and which in turn alter the related neurocircuit function. And this comes out as a drug adaptive behavior or addiction. That's basically what we are studying now.
Wow, it's always so fascinating to hear about people studying the brain because the brain is just so complex. And, so much research has been done in the field of neuroscience. And I wonder, how does it translate to everyday people like me? How is your research impacting people like us?
Yeah, from addiction aspect, our lab is focusing on the basis of how addiction happens. So once we know the mechanism, then we can find some methods or cure of this kind of disease, like a drug relapse or drug-seeking behavior. Previously, our lab developed a method called optogenetic inspired DBS, deep brain stimulation, which we successfully prevented we successfully reversed the mice drug-seeking behavior. But we are, there's still a long way from experiments to clinical applications. But we're just trying to better understand the addicted brain. And of course, for neuroscience, like people use SSRIs to treat depression, or D2 antagonists to treat schizophrenia. So that's what neuroscientists doing for general people, for the public people.
Why did you decide to go into an area of research like this?
It's just I'm curious of what people are thinking previously. And I studied biology at university. And because I'm curious of the living beings and how organized, how cells work, how plants And after that, I'm more curious about people, about what people are thinking, or some mental diseases which cause lots of abnormal behaviors or mental disorders. So I just want to see if there's biological basis of those kind of mental disorders, and then that's why I started studying neuroscience.
It's always so amazing when curiosity ends up sort of guiding you in a direction that leads to a career in STEM. Addiction is such a fascinating topic because it really feels like we live in a society where most people are addicted to something, whether it's work or watching Netflix or drinking or whatever. Like most people have some form of addiction. It must be then really difficult to pick one small area in this whole topic of addiction.
Well, from my perspective, addiction has a very strict, it has a core symptom called compulsive seek drug or use drug despite punishment. If you have a look at this kind of criteria, in cocaine users, there's only 20% of people who become addicted to cocaine. So now my work is focusing on this core symptom. Like if you look at watching TV, if I punish you, like you give me $10, and for 1 hour of TV, or just I give you a electric shock, to most of the people will stop this kind of behavior. So my study focused on the compulsive drug addiction. So which is to me is the most difficult people to deal with, right? Yeah. So, but for other rewards, to me, all addicted, like drugs or behavior, will elevate and increase dopamine in the brain. My study focused on the serotonin system, how serotonin affects addiction, and for cocaine addicts, there are about 20% of people get addicted, and if we take serotonin out of this system, there will be much more people get addicted to cocaine. So I'm focusing on how serotonin opposed to addiction.
Okay. So you could actually combat addiction by supplying serotonin in different ways. Is that essentially what your research is about?
Yeah. Because cocaine, other than dopamine, cocaine also elevate extracellular serotonin levels and norepinephrine levels. But most studies focus on dopamine because dopamine is so robustly elevated in the brain, and it's like a common mechanism underlying all aspects of reward and addictive drugs. But how serotonin participates is not very well understood. And if we take, because our lab developed a mouse model called optogenetic dopamine self-stimulation. So there's a pure dopamine system. And if we give punishment after they establish the self-stimulation paradigm, there's about 60% of mice become addicted. And if we add serotonin on top of dopamine, like we treat the mice with citalopram, then this percentage will drop to about 20. So it's about how serotonin can protect us from addiction.
Wow, that's fascinating to think that we could maybe combat addiction by supplying the happy drug in our brain some other way. How must studying this affect your daily life?
Well, it's funny, but because for most of the time I don't realize that there are so many chemicals and electric signals inside the brain. But yeah, I do sometimes, like when I'm playing with friends or just eating high calorie food, then I know my rewarding system is active. And sometimes I will tell me, well, it's just dopamine, stop eating. Or do more rewarding things, then I can, sometimes gain better control of myself.
That's so interesting, because honestly, when I studied mechanical engineering, it really changed the way I traveled, because when I was on a plane, I just knew exactly how the plane was staying in the sky. And it was almost easier to not know that, because I would be less worried as a flyer. So I wonder whether, subconsciously, so much now about the brain that, it must affect your daily choices.
No, but most of the time, no. Or sometimes, for some extent, it will comfort myself, because we always have highs and lows. Sometimes we are frustrated with like a failure with some experiments or getting negative results. Then I will just realize that this kind of unhappiness is just stimulation to the brain, and which depresses a specific brain area. And then I know, I will overcome this and stimulate a more happy center in the brain.
That is so funny, because I that's often one of my questions to my women in STEM is, how do you deal with failure? But it's so interesting that you deal with failure in a very considered way, because you know exactly what chemicals are causing you to feel the pain of failure.
The pain of the pain of failures. I know how the brain works, and I know how to, when failure comes, how you feel and what causes you feel like this. And then you can have like on a higher level, have an overview of yourself, and then you have get more self-consciousness. And sometimes it will make me feel better at least.
Well, that's so much of what I try to do on Innervation, because it's very much about a self-awareness and an inner journey. Because often when I see people unhappy or feeling uncomfortable about certain things, maybe caused by being in a minority as a woman in STEM, or because they're of ethnic minority, often it's a very inner journey, an inner understanding, which helps us out of it. But going back to your younger days, how has it been like developing your career as a woman in science? Because overall, there are less women in science than men. Has it been easy for you?
Well, it's not so difficult for me because during my PhD, at least there are like equal numbers of PhD students in my lab. So to me, it's not difficult, but when I moved to Switzerland, we have less women scientists somehow. But to me, it's just like human to human, but not women to men. The communication is like, I actually, I don't see the difference when we communicate or discuss with each other. I don't see the difference. But when you have a look at the PIs in your institute, there's always less women than men. Yeah.
But it doesn't seem like that's a problem for you.
To me, no. If it is a man or, I mean, my supervisor is a man or woman doesn't bother me a lot. But I'm more thinking about my future career because I want to be an independent researcher in the future. I'm more thinking of if I will be treated differently after I'm becoming independent researcher in the institute. There's always less women PIs than men PIs. But I don't know what I'm facing in the future. So but yeah, at this time, it's not bothering me.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point that you raise, because I think a lot of women don't think about potential obstacles that they face as they develop through their careers. I think you're at a stage in your career where you're just really interested and excited about your research. And so thinking about where your career is going is probably not something you look at. But I can see that you're looking around thinking, okay, where are the women? Because I would like to continue doing what I'm doing, but less and less women seem to be doing it, like the older you get in your career. So yeah, you're at a very interesting point where you're full of the enthusiasm for the research you're doing. But I think most STEM subjects or actually really any industry does reach a point for women where they have to think about how they juggle maybe motherhood and careers and things like that. Like, is this something that you ever worry about?
I'm lucky because I have a supportive family. My parents and my husband, they all support my choices and fully respect my decisions. And I believe that at some point, if we are gonna have children or have more like not non-science related stuff, I believe that they will help me a lot. And I don't care that this will slower my career, like development of my career, but I know it's so important, and I will put family first. But that doesn't mean that this is an obstacle of the career. So it's like a balance between family and your job, your work. Yeah, but at this point, I think I have the confidence that I can handle that because I have very supportive family, and I believe that in myself that I can. I'm so efficient, I'm efficient enough to organize everything to make family and career better.
Oh, that's so healthy. the fact that you have that confidence to say, I'll make it work, I'll make it balance. Because I think you mentioned something about your family and your husband being supportive. I think that's so key. When you've got a good network around you that can help you to achieve that balance, I think that's something that is really essential in women being able to have everything they want. What have mentors been for you? I mean, have you had role models in your life? Have you had mentors? And what kind of role have they played for you, if anything?
Okay, for science, definitely my supervisor. He knows so much about the field, and he knows how to lead the students or postdocs to follow the storyline and then finally finish them. And then he also knows to give us enough space and enough independence to do our own decisions. Yeah, to me, I really like this kind of working model. So we have our freedom and we are also supervised somehow. But we, for young scientists, we sometimes just like trying different things, but sometimes you need experienced people to tell you that this doesn't work, or they will they will reduce the mistakes you make. And also they have a very nice overview of the field. So I hope I can become this kind of supervisor in the future.
Yeah, that sounds like you've got such a great balance between someone that really trusts your abilities, but is also there to step in should you not be quite sure because they're so experienced. What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given? It doesn't necessarily have to be from someone professional, but when you look back on your life, like what's been the most important piece of advice you've received?
It's from my mother. She always tell me, do not complain. Do not complain about your environment. Do not complain about how you are treated. Sometimes it's unfair, but just to be optimistic. I think that's why I'm also optimistic all the time. And but this doesn't mean that you need to tolerate those unfair treatments. Just to have it's like a kind of comfort yourself and sometimes comfort others.
Yeah, that's so nice because I just feel like pain can often be, or negativity can often be a choice. And that's a really massive statement to make because, sometimes things are really painful. But I also try to see the silver lining in everything. Like even the worst situations, I try and dig deep to understand what I can get out of bad situations. And so I love your mum's advice. I think that's so wise. What then has been the most humbling experience you've ever had in your life?
Because I'm an Asian girl, sometimes Asian people are not that nice to girls. I mean, it's not like, maybe I used the wrong word. It's just they have, you need to get married or even give birth to a child before 30. But now I'm 30. So, sometimes I'm a little worried about the aging, about I'm getting old and I'm still not independent. I don't have my own lab, and I also don't have my child. I don't know if it is humbling. It's just sometimes anxiety about age. Yeah, but I don't.
That's so interesting that you say that as an example, because my favorite definition of humility is the ability to remain teachable. And so this idea that, you know, there's a lot of expectation to be in a certain place by a certain age with certain things, you know, I completely understand that kind of expectation, because I also come from a culture where certain things were expected, and I haven't done any of those things. So I totally get it. But it's interesting that you name that as your most humbling experience, because, yeah, I guess it is humbling, actually, because there's a certain process of like, well, I haven't done those things and I'm still proud of me. So is that sort of what you mean in terms of being humbled?
Well, it's just I think I should have done, but I don't reach that expectation. I don't, yeah. That sometimes that make me feel guilty sometimes as a child, as a daughter, or as a wife. Yeah.
Well, I must say, sort of looking from the outside in, and talking to you, you're just so incredibly impressive, and you seem so passionate about your work. You're obviously really knowledgeable in what you do. So, I mean, you've exceeded my expectations, if that's of any interest to you. And I'm sure anyone watching this will be really inspired by the path that you have taken. I'm really keen to ask you what it has been like as someone who was born in a different country and now lives in a very different environment. Like, how has that been and what have you learned?
Well, it's really funny because since it's in Geneva, the official language is French, but I don't speak French at all. So when I just arrived here, I really feel isolated from the society or from the environment, because when you go to the post office, people don't speak English. Go to the supermarket, yeah, it's really difficult at first. But once people are plastic, yeah. Once I develop this kind of plasticity, you know, I'm adapted to this kind of life. Then I started to enjoy and learned a kind of French a little bit. So, yeah. But in the lab at work, it's not really different, I would say. I'm really super comfortable with work here. It's just living in a different environment. Yeah. At first it's really difficult, but once you get used to it and start trying to learn other cultures, it's really interesting.
Yeah, I really relate to you because I recently moved to Paris, and I'm traveling a lot between Paris and London, and I was worried. I was worried about moving to Paris because I don't speak French very well. And I was worried about fitting in. And you're absolutely right. It is about getting used to it and giving yourself time to adapt. And I love this word plasticity. Our brains are really plastic, aren't they? They just adapt, don't they?
Yeah, it's also about plasticity. Your brain is used to adapt to this kind of information processing, and then you are comfortable with that. Yeah, you're right.
Well, you know what? If a scientist is going to tell me that, I'm going to believe you. It does take time, though, doesn't it? And sometimes we can be impatient because we really just want to feel part of a community. But I think, you must have really invested a lot of time in that adaptation process because you've come from very different places. And so what advice would you give to anyone who is in the middle of that adaptation and is feeling quite frustrated?
It's normal. It's not your fault to feel frustrated, but you can do something to comfort yourself, like learning French or just going out, talk to people, and you will find some funny things will happen. Yeah, just stand this kind of frustration and then start doing something, and this will definitely make yourself happier.
Yeah, I love that advice because I've heard that as well from other people. They're like, just talk. Don't worry about making mistakes. Just speak to people. Speak to people in French and get it all wrong. I think sometimes we hold ourselves to such high standards that we're scared. Perfectionism can really stop us from trying. But your research is incredibly fascinating. I really wish you all the best with your postdoc work. And thank you so much for giving us a little insight into the world of neuroscience and addiction. I think there's so much to do, isn't there? You're definitely going to be busy for the rest of your career.
Sure. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for listening, and please do subscribe to this podcast and maybe even rate and review it if you can. The more ratings and reviews, then the more interest from those trusty algorithms, which could help to increase the reach of this show. And you can watch the video recording of this conversation on YouTube on my new series, Esteemed. It's all about self-discovery and self-evolution on innovation. So as always, be kind and loving to yourselves, and I wish you all a great week.